I am Sarah Jenkins, 52 years old, and my husband, the man I grieved for 3 agonizing years, walked through my front door not as a ghost, but as a landlord with a new family. Before I tell you about how I sent him to prison in handcuffs, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. It was a Tuesday in November, the kind of Michigan night where the cold doesn't just sit on your skin, it burrows into your bones. The wind was howling off Lake Michigan, rattling the old window frames of the house I had fought tooth and nail to keep. I was sitting at the kitchen table, wrapped in 2 sweaters because I kept the thermostat at 60 degrees to save on the heating bill. The only light came from the small lamp over the table and the glow of my calculator. I was staring at a stack of bills. The property tax, the heating, the water. I had $7 left in my checking account until my next shift at the hospital. $7. I was tired. Not the kind of tired that a good night's sleep fixes, but the kind of soul-deep exhaustion that comes from holding up the sky by yourself for 1,000 days. Then, I heard it. The sound of a car engine in the driveway. Not a passing car, but one that had stopped. My heart did that painful stutter it always does when I'm startled. I wasn't expecting anyone. No one visits a widow at 9 p.m. in a snowstorm. I stood up, my joints popping, and went to the window. I pulled back the curtain just an inch. Twin beams of headlights cut through the swirling snow. It was a large SUV, sleek and black, looking like a monster crouching in my driveway. Fear pricked at my neck. I lived alone. I grabbed the heavy brass candlestick from the mantel, my only weapon, and moved toward the door. I didn't open it. I waited. Then, the keypad on the electronic lock beeped. Beep. 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 My blood ran cold. I froze, the candlestick trembling in my hand. Only 2 people knew that code. Me. And Mark. But Mark was dead. Mark had drowned in the lake 3 years ago. The police had found his boat capsized, drifting like a tombstone on the water. They never found his body, but they told me the lake doesn't always give back what it takes. The lock clicked. The handle turned. The door swung open, letting in a gust of freezing wind and snow. And there he was. Mark Jenkins. He didn't look like a man who had been lost at sea. He didn't look like a victim. He was wearing a camel-colored cashmere coat that probably cost more than my car. His skin was tanned, a deep, rich bronze that you don't get in a Michigan winter. He looked healthier, fuller, alive. For a second, I thought I was hallucinating. I thought the grief had finally snapped my mind in 2. I dropped the candlestick. It hit the floor with a dull thud. Mark? I whispered. The name felt like broken glass in my throat. He stepped inside, kicking the snow off his expensive leather boots. He didn't look at me with love. He didn't rush to hold me. He didn't cry. He looked at me the way you look at an old piece of furniture you forgot you owned. "Hello, Sarah," he said. His voice was smooth, devoid of any warmth. And then, he stepped aside. Behind him, a woman walked in. She was young, maybe 25 or 26. She had long, perfectly styled blonde hair that fell over a fur coat. And in her arms, she held a sleeping toddler, wrapped in a blue blanket. The woman looked around my living room, my sanctuary, the place I had scrubbed and polished and wept in, and wrinkled her nose. "It's smaller than you said, Mark," she said. Her voice was high and nasal. Mark closed the door, shutting out the storm, but trapping me in a new one. He walked past me, right past the wedding photo that still hung in the hallway, and tossed a leather briefcase onto my kitchen table, scattering my bills. "We need to talk," Mark said, unbuttoning his coat. I couldn't move. My brain was trying to process the image. My dead husband. A strange woman. A child. "You're alive," I managed to say, my voice shaking. "Mark, my God, you're alive. Where have you been? What happened?" I thought. He waved his hand dismissively, like he was swatting away a fly. Save the drama, Sarah. I haven't been missing. I've been living. He pulled a chair out, his old chair, and sat down. The young woman stood behind him, shifting the baby on her hip. She looked at me with a mix of boredom and pity. This is Tiffany, Mark said, gesturing to her with his thumb. And this is Noah. My son. My son. The words hit me harder than the cold wind. We had tried for 10 years to have children. 10 years of doctors, of negative tests, of tears. And here he was, 3 years after leaving me, with a healthy son and a woman half my age. I don't understand, I stammered. I felt tears welling up, hot and stinging. Mark, why? Why didn't you call? Why did you let me believe you were dead? Mark sighed, a long, exaggerated sound of irritation. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He slid it across the table toward me. It wasn't a love letter. It wasn't an apology. It was an eviction notice. This is a formal notice, Mark said, his tone businesslike. I'm reclaiming the property. Since the deed is in my name, well, technically both our names, but I'm the primary, I have the right to reside here. I stared at the paper. The words swam before my eyes. Notice to vacate. You're kicking me out? I asked. Mark, I paid the mortgage. I paid every cent for 3 years. I worked 3 jobs to keep this house from foreclosure because I thought it was the last piece of you I had left. He chuckled. It was a dry, cruel sound. That was your choice, Sarah. Nobody asked you to play the martyr. But things have changed. I have a family now. A real family. And we need the master suite. He looked me up and down, taking in my faded sweater, my graying hair pulled back in a messy bun, my chapped hands. You can take the guest room for tonight, he said, as if he were doing me a favor. But starting tomorrow, you move to the converted shed out back. Or you can leave. I don't really care. But Tiffany needs the space for the nursery. Tiffany chimed in, and we're going to need the kitchen by 7 a.m. Noah has a specific feeding schedule. I looked from Mark to Tiffany, and then down at the eviction notice. The shock was starting to fade, replaced by a dull, throbbing ache in my chest. This wasn't the man I married. The man I married was kind. He was gentle. This man was a stranger wearing my husband's face. You can't do this, I whispered. I can, Mark said, leaning forward. His eyes were hard, like flint. And I am. This house is a goldmine, Sarah. The new highway project is coming through next year. Property values are skyrocketing. I'm not letting you sit on a $2 million asset while I have a son to raise. He stood up, signaling the conversation was over. Go pack a bag for the guest room. Don't make a scene. You know how much I hate scenes. He turned his back on me and walked toward the master bedroom, my bedroom, the room where we had shared dreams and secrets. Tiffany followed him, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. I stood there in the kitchen, the silence of the house settling around me again. But this time it wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the candlestick at his head, even though every fiber of my being wanted to. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking, but not from fear anymore. They were shaking from rage. He thought he could walk back in after 3 years, erase my life, and shove me into a shed? He thought I was just the quiet, mousy nurse he left behind. I picked up the eviction notice. I folded it neatly. Mark Jenkins had made a fatal mistake. He thought he had returned to evict him. But he had walked into the home of a woman who had walked through hell and came out the other side. I wasn't going to leave. I was going to watch. I was going to wait. And I was going to find out exactly where he had been for 1,095 days. To understand why I didn't break that night, you have to understand what broke me 3 years ago. You have to understand the hell Mark left me in. It was July 4th weekend, 3 years ago. The sun was shining, the lake was sparkling like a sea of diamonds. Mark had told me he needed to clear his head. He said work had been stressful, he was a real estate broker, always chasing the next big commission. He took the small fishing boat we owned, the Lady Sarah, and headed out. "I'll be back for dinner," he had said. He kissed me on the cheek. I remember his lips felt cold, even in the heat. Dinner came and went. The sun set, painting the sky in bruised purples and reds. Mark didn't come back. By midnight, I was pacing the dock, calling his phone over and over. Straight to voicemail. By 3 a.m., the sheriff's boat was out with searchlights sweeping the black water. I stood on the shore, wrapped in a blanket, shivering despite the summer heat. The red and blue lights of the police cruisers reflected on the water, rhythmic and terrifying. At dawn, Sheriff Miller came to me. He took off his hat. That's when I knew. "We found the boat, Sarah," he said softly. "It was capsized near the point. No sign of Mark." I fell to my knees in the sand. I screamed then. I screamed until my throat bled. They dragged the lake for a week. Divers, sonar, everything. They found his fishing hat. They found a cooler. But they never found Mark. "Presumed drowned," the report said. "Accidental." I held a funeral with an empty casket. I buried a box of air and cried over a patch of grass. Everyone told me how sorry they were. "He was such a good man," they said. A tragedy. But the grief was just the first wave. The tsunami came a month later. I was sitting in the living room, staring at a photo of us, when the phone rang. It wasn't a friend checking in. It was a collection agency. "Mrs. Jenkins? We're calling about the outstanding balance on the credit card ending in 4409. We don't have a card ending in 4409, I said, confused. "It's in your husband's name, ma'am. Joint account. The balance is $42,000. I dropped the phone. Over the next week, the secrets Mark had kept started to rot and spill out. It wasn't just one card. It was 5. There were loans I didn't know about. Second mortgages. Gambling debts. Mark hadn't just been stressed about work, he had been drowning in a sea of bad bets and high-stakes poker games in Detroit. He had leveraged everything. Our savings. His life insurance policy, which, I discovered to my horror, had lapsed 2 months before he disappeared because he stopped paying the premiums. I was left with nothing but a house that was underwater and a mountain of debt that had my name attached to it. The creditors were like vultures. They didn't care that I was a widow. They didn't care that I was grieving. They called at dinner. They called at work. They threatened to take the house. This house, it wasn't just a building. My parents built this house. My father laid the floorboards with his own hands. My mother planted the hydrangeas out front. When they died, they left it to me. It was the only thing I had of them. And Mark had gambled it away. I had a choice. Declare bankruptcy and lose the house, or fight. I chose to fight. I was a school nurse, which paid decently but not enough to cover Mark's sins. So I took a second job working the night shift at a diner on the highway. And on weekends, I cleaned houses for the wealthy summer tourists who came to the lake. I remember one afternoon vividly. I was cleaning the bathroom of a mansion down the shore. I was on my knees, scrubbing the grout of a marble floor, the smell of bleach burning my nose. My knees were bruised. My back was screaming in agony. I looked into the mirror and saw a woman I didn't recognize. My eyes were hollow. My skin was gray. I looked 20 years older. Is this it? I asked my reflection. Is this my life now? Cleaning up other people's filth to pay for a ghost's mistakes? But I didn't stop. I sold everything that wasn't bolted down. Mark's golf clubs. The second car. The fancy grill. And then came the day I had to sell my rings. I walked into the pawnshop on 8th Street, my hand clutching the small velvet bag. The engagement ring. The wedding band. The eternity ring he gave me for our 10th anniversary. The pawnbroker, a man with grease under his fingernails, put a loop to his eye and examined them. 1,200, he grunted. They're insured for 10,000, I protested, my voice weak. I'm not an insurance company, lady. 1,200. Take it or leave it. I took it. I needed to pay the property tax. I walked out of that shop feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. My finger felt naked. I rubbed the indent where the gold had sat for 15 years. I felt like I had betrayed our love. But looking back now, I realize I wasn't betraying love. I was surviving betrayal. For 3 years, I lived on ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches. I turned the heat down to 60. I wore sweaters until they unraveled. I walked to work when my old sedan broke down because I couldn't afford the mechanic. Every month, when I made the mortgage payment, it felt like a victory. I whispered to the walls of the house, I've got you. He tried to take you, but I've got you. I mourned Mark, yes. But mixed with the grief was a burning, confusing anger. How could he leave me like this? How could he be so reckless? I spent nights crying into my pillow, asking his ghost why he didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. Why didn't he let me help him fix it? I thought he was a tragic figure. A man who made mistakes and paid the ultimate price. So, you see, when he walked through that door in his cashmere coat, with his mistress and his arrogance, it wasn't just a shock. It was an insult to every blister on my hands. It was a mockery of every meal I skipped. It was spitting on every tear I shed. He hadn't died. He had quit. He had checked out of his life because it got too hard, leaving me to clean up the wreckage, and now that I had glued the pieces back together, he wanted to move back in. That night, lying on the lumpy mattress in the guest room, listening to the wind howl, I realized something. The Sarah who cried over the empty casket was gone. She died in that pawn shop. The woman who remained was forged in debt and labor. And that woman was not going to be evicted. The next morning, the sun rose over a world covered in white, brilliant and blinding. But inside the house, the atmosphere was suffocating. I woke up at 5 a.m. out of habit. My body was used to the early shift. For a split second, I forgot. I reached for the other side of the bed, expecting it to be empty, cold. Then I realized I wasn't in my bed. I was in the guest room, surrounded by boxes of old winter clothes I had stored in there. The reality crashed down on me. Mark was upstairs. I got dressed in my nurse's scrubs, splashing cold water on my face in the small guest bathroom. I needed coffee. Desperately. I walked into the kitchen, trying to be quiet. But the kitchen was already occupied. Tiffany was there. She was wearing a silk robe that shimmered under the kitchen lights. She was leaning against the counter, holding my favorite mug, the blue ceramic one my mother had made. She was scrolling through her phone, looking bored. The baby, Noah, was in a high chair that Mark must have brought in from the car last night. He was banging a plastic spoon on the tray, cheering happily. "Morning," Tiffany said, not looking up. She didn't sound friendly. She sounded like she was addressing the help. "That's my mug," I said. It was a stupid thing to say, given the circumstances, but it was the first thing that came out. Tiffany looked at the mug, then at me. She smirked. "Oh. Sorry. It was just sitting there. It looks a bit chipped anyway. You should really update your dishware. It's all very thrift store chic." She took a sip, her eyes challenging me. Mark walked in then. He was showered, smelling of a cologne I didn't recognize, something musky and expensive. He was wearing a crisp white shirt and dark trousers. He looked like the successful businessman he had always pretended to be. "Coffee's on," he said to Tiffany, kissing her on the temple. He ignored me. Mark, I said, my voice steady. We need to discuss logistics. If you're staying here, staying? He laughed, pouring himself a cup. Sarah, I live here. This is my house. I built this life. You're the one who is lingering. I paid the mortgage for 3 years, I repeated. I felt like a broken record, but it was the only shield I had. I paid off your debts, Mark. The credit cards. The loans. Do you have any idea what I went through? Mark turned to me, his face hardening. And I'm grateful, Sarah. Really. You were always a good worker bee. But let's be realistic. You couldn't have managed this place forever. It's too much for one person. Especially someone with your income. He took a sip of coffee and leaned against the island. Here's the plan. I've already contacted a realtor. The highway project is greenlit. Developers are buying up properties along the lakefront for luxury condos. This house? It's going to be a teardown. My breath hitched. Teardown? Mark, this is my parents' house. It's a piece of land, Sarah, he snapped. Don't get sentimental. It's a $2 million lot. With that money, Tiffany and I are moving to Seattle. I have a business opportunity there. And you? You'll get a cut. Enough to buy a nice little condo in town. Maybe get a cat. It's a win-win. I don't want a condo, I said, my hands clenching into fists. I want my home. It's not your home anymore. Tiffany interjected. God, why are you being so difficult? Mark said you were stubborn, but this is pathetic. Look at this place. She waved a manicured hand around the kitchen. The cabinets are dated. The wallpaper is hideous. It smells like old people. It smells like hard work, I shot back. Something you clearly know nothing about. Tiffany's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? Mark stepped between us. Enough. Sarah, go to work. We can discuss the sale details later. My lawyers are drafting the paperwork. But let me be clear, you are not to interfere. If you try to sabotage this sale, if you try to claim squatters' rights or whatever nonsense you're thinking, I will bury you in legal fees so deep you'll never see the sun again. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. Remember, Sarah. I know you. You're weak. You avoid conflict. You kept this house because you couldn't let go of the past. Well, the past is back, and it's telling you to move on. He smiled. It was the smile of a shark. I grabbed my bag and walked out the door. I didn't cry. I didn't slam the door. I walked to my car, the rusty 2012 Honda Civic I had bought for $3,000 cash, and sat in the driver's seat. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. Weak. He called me weak. He was right about the old Sarah. The old Sarah would have crumbled. The old Sarah would have signed the papers just to make the yelling stop. But he didn't know about the nights I worked the diner shift, wiping grease off tables while drunks hit on me. He didn't know about the days I stood in the ER, holding the hands of dying patients because their families hadn't arrived yet. I started the car. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. I wasn't going to the hospital. Not yet. I pulled out of the driveway, looking back at the house. I saw Tiffany in the window, holding Noah, watching me leave. She looked like a queen surveying her conquered kingdom. Let them think they won the battle. I drove to the end of the street, pulled over, and took out my phone. I dialed the number of the hospital. This is Sarah Jenkins, I said. I need to take a personal day. Family emergency. I hung up. Then I opened the Notes app on my phone and started a new list. 1. Find out where he was. 2. Find out where the money came from. 3. Find out who Tiffany really is. Mark wanted to talk about assets? Fine. I was going to do an audit on his entire existence. I spent that day in the public library, using their free computer. I couldn't risk using the home Wi-Fi, Mark might be monitoring it. I started searching. I searched for Mark's name. I searched for Tiffany Jenkins, nothing. I searched for real estate records. I found nothing. It was like he had ceased to exist for 3 years and then popped back into reality. No employment records. No rental agreements. Nothing. He had been careful. Or he had been someone else. I returned home around 6 p.m., dreading what I would find. The driveway was full. A moving truck was parked there. I rushed inside. My heart stopped. The living room was in chaos. My furniture, the floral armchair I loved, the antique coffee table, the bookshelf full of my novels, was being hauled out by 2 burly movers. "Stop!" I yelled. "What are you doing?" Mark was standing in the center of the room, directing them. "Careful with that lamp." He turned to me. "Ah, Sarah. Good. You're back. We're doing a little redecorating." Tiffany couldn't stand the clutter. "Clutter?" I pointed to the bookshelf. "Those are my books. That's my mother's chair." "We're putting it in storage," Mark said calmly. "Or the dump. We haven't decided. We ordered some new pieces from Italy. Minimalist. White leather. Much better for staging the house for buyers. You can't throw away my things." I lunged for a box of photos a mover was holding. Mark grabbed my arm. His grip was tight. Painful. "Sarah. Stop it. You're embarrassing yourself." I looked at him. His eyes were cold, dead. "Let go of me." He released me with a shove. "Go to your room. The guest room. Stay out of the way." I retreated. I had no choice. The movers were watching, uncomfortable. I walked down the hall to the guest room. As I passed the master bedroom, the door was open. I looked in. The bed, our bed, was stripped. The blue duvet I had bought for our anniversary was in a trash bag in the corner. Tiffany was hanging her clothes in the closet. My clothes, my humble, practical sweaters and scrubs, were piled on the floor like dirty laundry. Tiffany saw me looking. She held up a silk nightgown. "Do you think this color works with the walls? Or should we repaint?" I was thinking a soft gray. She smiled. It was a smile full of teeth. "Oh, and Sarah," she added. I threw out those granny panties I found in the top drawer. Honestly, Mark was right. You really let yourself go. The humiliation burned my face like acid. She was violating every inch of my privacy, erasing me from my own life, and enjoying it. I went into the guest room and locked the door. I sat on the floor, hugging my knees. Later that night, the smell of pizza drifted under the door. Truffle oil and expensive cheese. They had ordered from the gourmet Italian place in town. No one knocked to ask if I was hungry. I ate a stale granola bar I found in my purse. Through the thin walls, I could hear them. The clinking of wine glasses. Laughter. Mark's deep, booming laugh, a sound I used to love, now a sound that made me nauseous. Then, the sounds changed. The creaking of the floorboards in the master bedroom above. The rhythmic thumping of the bed frame. Tiffany's exaggerated moans. I put my hands over my ears. I squeezed my eyes shut. This is a test, I told myself. This is a test of your resolve. They wanted me to break. They wanted me to burst into that room screaming, acting the part of the crazy, jealous ex-wife. If I did that, Mark would call the police. He would paint me as unstable. He would get a restraining order and kick me out legally. I bit my lip until I tasted copper. Cold, I told myself. Be cold like the lake. At 11 p.m., silence finally fell. I waited another hour. Then, I opened my door. The house was dark. I crept into the hallway. The air smelled of their expensive wine and Mark's cologne. I walked to the kitchen. The trash can was full. I saw the takeout boxes. I saw the empty wine bottle, a vintage Cabernet. And right on top, I saw something else. Mark's phone bill. He had crumpled it up, probably thinking nothing of it. I picked it up. My hands were shaking, but I smoothed it out on the counter. It was for a mobile plan under a name I didn't recognize. David Stone. And the address on the bill wasn't in Michigan. It was a P.O. box in Arizona. I stared at the name. David Stone. Why would Mark have a phone bill under a different name? I took a picture of the bill with my phone. Then I carefully crumpled it back up and placed it exactly where it had been in the trash. I looked up toward the ceiling, toward the room where they slept. "Sleep well, Mark," I whispered. "David. Whoever you are." The humiliation was fuel. Every insult, every discarded item, every moan I had been forced to hear, it was all fuel. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the hunter. And I had just found the first footprint. The next few days were a masterclass in acting. I adopted what therapists call the gray rock method. I became boring. Unresponsive. A literal rock. When Tiffany made snide comments about my hair, "Have you ever heard of conditioner?" I just nodded and said, "Probably." When Mark ordered me to clean up Noah's spilled milk because you're good at cleaning, I wiped it up without a word. They loved it. They thought they had broken me. They thought I was accepting my defeat, preparing to take my meager settlement and disappear into the ether. "See?" I heard Mark tell Tiffany one evening while I was folding laundry in the hallway. "I told you she wouldn't fight. Sarah doesn't have the stomach for war." "She's pathetic," Tiffany giggled. "But useful. At least we don't have to hire a maid." I gritted my teeth and kept folding. Keep talking, I thought. Get comfortable. Get sloppy. And they did. Mark was arrogant. He left his laptop open on the kitchen table while he went to shower. I tried to look, but it was password protected. Damn. But Tiffany. Tiffany was a millennial obsessed with her image. She lived on her phone. She was constantly taking selfies in my house, posing with my hydrangeas, captioning them "country living #blessed." On Friday, Mark went out to meet with the developers. Tiffany was in the living room, painting her nails. Her phone was propped up on the coffee table, playing a playlist of pop music. I was dusting the blinds, my assigned chore for the day. "Hey," Tiffany said, blowing on her nails. "Can you bring me a Diet Coke? With ice. Crushed ice." "Sure," I said flatly. I went to the kitchen. As I cracked the ice tray, an idea formed. It was risky. But I needed to know who she was. I brought the drink back. "Here." "Thanks," she muttered, not looking away from her nails. "You have a lovely family," I said, keeping my voice monotone. "How long have you and Mark been together?" Tiffany smirked, eager to brag. "Oh, forever. Like, 3 years. We met right after right after he left here. He was so broken, you know? He needed someone who really understood him. Someone with life. 3 years. That meant he met her immediately. Or maybe before." "That's nice," I said. "Must have been hard, him being missing." She waved her hand. "Oh, we were in Mexico for the first year. Cabo is amazing. You've probably never been." "Mexico?" "No," I said. "Never been. You should see the resort we stayed at. The Azure Coast. 5 stars. Mark knows the owner." She picked up her phone to change the song. As she did, she unlocked it. "Oops, battery is low," she muttered. She plugged it into the charger on the wall and stood up. "I'm going to take a nap while Noah is sleeping." Don't make any noise. She walked away, leaving her phone on the coffee table. Unlocked. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I waited until I heard her bedroom door click shut. I moved. I picked up the phone. My fingers were trembling. I went straight to Instagram. Her profile was public, but I had never known her last name to look it up. Tiffany_star_88. I scrolled down. Past the photos of Noah. Past the photos of her in my house. I scrolled back 3 years. There it was. A photo dated August 10th, 1 month after Mark drowned. It was a selfie of Tiffany and Mark. They were on a boat. Mark was holding a champagne glass, wearing sunglasses, looking tanned and happy. The caption read, "New beginnings with my love. Hashtag Cabo, hashtag freedom, hashtag no looking back." I felt sick. Physically sick. On August 10th, I was selling my plasma to pay the electric bill. On August 10th, I was crying on the floor of my closet, smelling his old shirts. And he was in Cabo drinking champagne. I scrolled further. Another photo. December of that year. Mark standing in front of a luxury car. But then I noticed something in the background of the Cabo photo. A tote bag sitting on the deck of the boat. It had a logo on it. Stone Consulting. David Stone. The name on the phone bill. I quickly took photos of her screen with my own phone. The dates. The locations. The comments. I heard a floorboard creak upstairs. I dropped the phone back onto the table just as Tiffany appeared at the top of the stairs. "Did you make noise?" she asked, suspicious. "Just dropping the duster," I said, picking it up. "Clumsy," she sneered and went back into the room. I exhaled, my lungs burning. I had the timeline. He didn't disappear and then meet her. He ran away to be with her. And he had been living as David Stone. But knowing it wasn't enough. I needed to prove it legally. And I needed to know where the money came from. You don't live in Cabo for a year on a real estate broker's salary, especially when you're bankrupt. I needed help. I needed someone who knew the law better than Mark's fancy corporate lawyers. I needed Henry. Henry Cole was a dinosaur. That's what people called him. He was 70 years old, practiced law out of a converted Victorian house on Elm Street that smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco. He had been my father's lawyer, and he had helped me with the probate when my parents died. He wasn't flashy. He didn't have billboards. But he was sharp as a tack and hated bullies. I took my lunch break from the cleaning Mark assigned me and drove to Henry's office. When I walked in, the secretary, Mrs. Higgins, gasped. "Sarah. My goodness, we heard Mark is back." "He is," I said grimly. "Is Henry in?" "For you?" "Always." I walked into his office. Henry was sitting behind a desk piled high with files. He looked up, his bushy white eyebrows knitting together. "Sarah," he said, standing up to shake my hand. His grip was firm. "I heard the news. The prodigal son returns. I assume you're here because you want to know if you have to let him back in your bed." "I want to know how to put him in jail," I said. Henry paused. He looked at me over his spectacles. "Sit down." I sat. I told him everything. The eviction notice. The debt I paid. Tiffany. The name David Stone. The Instagram photos. Henry listened, tapping his pen on the desk. When I finished, he leaned back. "This is a mess, Sarah," he said honestly. "Legally, he's your husband. He has claim to the marital assets. Since he's alive, the death certificate will be rescinded. The property reverts to joint ownership. But he abandoned me." I cried. "He left me with $40,000 of debt." "Abandonment is grounds for divorce," Henry said. "But in a divorce, assets are split. He'll get half the house value." And since the market is up, he walks away with $1 million, and you get, well, you get half minus the debts. That's not justice, I said. No, Henry agreed. That's the law. However. He leaned forward, a glint in his eye. You mentioned the name David Stone. Yes. Phone bill. And a logo on a bag. If Mark Jenkins was living as David Stone, Henry said slowly, and if he used that identity to conduct financial transactions, that's identity fraud. But that's not the big fish. What is? Where did the money come from, Sarah? Henry asked. You said he was broke. Gambling debts. Yet he lived in a 5-star resort in Cabo for a year. How? I shook my head. I don't know. Did Mark have life insurance? Henry asked. Yes. But it lapsed. I called the company when he died. They said the premiums hadn't been paid for 2 months prior. Henry frowned. Mark was a broker. He knew insurance inside and out. If he was planning to disappear, he wouldn't let the policy lapse unless. He stood up and walked to a filing cabinet. Unless he had another policy. One you didn't know about. Or. He turned to me. Or he didn't claim it as Mark Jenkins. Sarah, if he faked his death, he couldn't collect his own life insurance. He's not the beneficiary. You are. I never got a dime, I said. Exactly. So where is the money? Henry paced the room. Workers' comp? Disability? Or, maybe he didn't claim life insurance. Maybe he claimed something else. He looked at me. We need to find out who David Stone is. Is he a real person Mark stole the identity of? Or a shell? How do we do that? I have a private investigator I use, Henry said. Expensive, but worth it. But we need a starting point. We need a social security number, or a bank account number linked to Stone. I thought about the house. The laptop I couldn't open. The locked briefcase. I can get it, I said. He keeps a briefcase locked in the study. He opens it every night to check some ledgers. Sarah, Henry warned. If you break into his things, it's inadmissible in court. It's fruit of the poisonous tree. I won't break in, I said, a plan forming in my mind. I'll make him open it. He thinks I'm stupid, Henry. He thinks I'm a submissive, beaten-down housewife. He doesn't think I'm a threat. Henry smiled. It was a grim smile. Hubris. The downfall of every Greek hero and every idiot criminal. One more thing, Henry said. You mentioned the house deed. You said your parents left it to you. Yes. But Mark convinced me to add his name 10 years ago. For refinancing. Henry pulled a file. I have the original records here. If we can prove fraud, if we can prove he obtained that signature or maintained that ownership through criminal enterprise, we might be able to void his claim entirely. But we need the smoking gun. We need to prove he didn't just run away. We need to prove he committed a felony to do it. I stood up. I'll get your proof. I left Henry's office feeling something I hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. But as I drove back to the house, the snow started falling again. Thick, heavy flakes. I pulled into the driveway. Mark was outside, shoveling snow. He looked annoyed. Manual labor wasn't his thing. When he saw me, he stopped. He leaned on the shovel, looking at my rusty car with disgust. Where were you? He asked as I got out. Library, I lied. Looking for apartments. His face softened. He smiled. Good girl. See? It's not so hard to accept reality, is it? No, Mark, I said, meeting his eyes. Reality is becoming very clear to me. He laughed and went back to shoveling. He didn't see the fire in my eyes. He didn't see that the good girl was gone. I walked into the house. Tiffany was screaming at Noah in the kitchen. "Shut up. God, just shut up." Noah was crying in his high chair, his face red. I walked over, picked up the baby, and shushed him. He settled into my shoulder immediately, smelling of milk and tears. Tiffany glared at me. "He's impossible today." "He's lonely," I said. I looked at the baby. An innocent victim in this mess. Mark didn't care about him. Tiffany didn't care about him. I wasn't just fighting for my house anymore. I was fighting to expose a monster. And tonight, I was going to get into that briefcase. The weekend arrived, bringing a thaw that turned the beautiful white snow into gray, ugly slush. It matched the mood inside the house perfectly. Mark was in high spirits. He had a meeting with the developers on Monday to finalize the pre-sale agreement. He was already spending the money in his head, talking loudly on the phone to car dealerships in Seattle about importing a vintage Porsche. I continued my performance. I cooked. I cleaned. I even babysat Noah when Tiffany needed a break to go get a massage with Mark's credit card, or rather, the credit card that was slowly accumulating debt in my name again, though I had already put a freeze on my credit reports the day after I saw Henry. Mark just didn't know it yet. Saturday night was my opportunity. Mark and Tiffany were going out to a celebratory dinner at the most expensive steakhouse in town. Mark wanted to show off his return to society. He wanted to be seen. "Don't wait up," he told me as he adjusted his silk tie in the hallway mirror. "And make sure Noah is asleep by 8. He gets cranky." "Have fun," I said, wiping the counter. "You look successful." Mark preened. "I am successful, Sarah. It's a state of mind. You wouldn't understand." They left at 7 p.m. As soon as the taillights of his SUV disappeared down the driveway, I moved. I put Noah to bed. Poor little thing. He was sweet when his mother wasn't screeching at him. I looked at him sleeping in the crib Mark had hastily set up in the corner of the master bedroom, and I felt a pang of guilt. I was about to blow up his world. But I reminded myself, I am not destroying his family. His father did that long ago. I went to the study. This room used to be my sewing room, but Mark had commandeered it the moment he returned. He kept the door locked, but the lock was a simple interior privacy lock. A bobby pin and 5 seconds of wiggling were all it took. I slipped inside. The room smelled of him, stale cigar smoke and ambition. His briefcase was on the desk. It was a sleek, metallic Halliburton case with a combination lock. I stared at the tumblers. 3 digits. I tried his birthday. 051, click. Nothing. I tried our anniversary. 062, click. Nothing. I tried Noah's birthday, which I had seen on a medical form on the counter. 114, click. Nothing. Panic started to prickle at my skin. They would be gone for at least 2 hours, but what if they forgot something? What if they came back early? I closed my eyes and thought like Mark. Mark was a narcissist. He loved himself. But more than that, he loved his freedom. He loved the moment he escaped. What was the date he died? The date he disappeared on the lake. July 4th, 074. I spun the dials. 0. 7. 4. Click. The latches popped open with a sound that seemed as loud as a gunshot in the quiet house. My hands were sweating. I lifted the lid. Inside, it wasn't chaotic. It was meticulously organized. Mark was a crook, but he was a neat one. There were stacks of cash, crisp $100 bills wrapped in bands. Maybe $5,000. Running money. There was a folder labeled Seattle Condos. And at the bottom, tucked under a false lining that I only found because I felt the uneven thickness of the leather, was a blue folder. I opened it. The first thing I saw was a passport. I opened it. The photo was Mark, smiling that arrogant smile. But the name was David Stone. Nationality, American. Date of birth, adjusted to be 3 years younger than Mark. I flipped through the pages. Stamps. Mexico, Cabo San Lucas. Cayman Islands. Switzerland. So, he hadn't just been in Mexico. He had been moving money. Behind the passport were bank statements from a bank in the Cayman Islands. Stone Holdings LLC. The balance, $12,000. I frowned. 12,000? That was nothing. Where was the rest? Then I saw the withdrawals. Huge transfers. $50,000 here. $100,000 there. All transferred to Crypto Exchange 44. He had gambled it again. Or hidden it in Bitcoin. But the smoking gun, the piece of paper that Henry said we needed to nail him for fraud, was at the very back. It was a letter from Apex Insurance Group. Claim hashtag 99201B beneficiary, David Stone. Regarding the accidental death and dismemberment policy of Mark Jenkins. I stopped breathing. Mark Jenkins had taken out a policy on himself using a fake identity as the beneficiary before he disappeared? No, that didn't make sense. You can't be the beneficiary of your own death. I read closer. Beneficiary, Stone Consulting, David Stone, CEO. Relationship to deceased, business partner/creditor. He had created a fake company. He had listed Mark Jenkins as a key executive who owed the company money, key person insurance. When Mark died, David Stone, Mark, claimed the insurance to cover the loss to the business. The payout amount, $1.5 million. He had stolen $1.5 million from an insurance company by pretending to be his own business partner, collecting on his own death. And he had spent it all. The luxury resort. Tiffany's furs. The lifestyle. It was all gone, burned through in 3 years of high living. That's why he was back. He wasn't just investing in a new highway project. He was broke. He needed the house money to restart the cycle. I pulled out my phone. I took pictures of everything. Every page. Every stamp. Every serial number. I was shaking so hard the first few photos were blurry. I had to brace my elbows on the desk to steady myself. Focus, Sarah. Focus. I finished photographing the documents. Then, I put everything back exactly as I found it. The false bottom. The cash. The files. I closed the case. I spun the tumblers back to random numbers. I locked the study door behind me. I went back to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and sat in the dark. I had him. I wasn't just going to win the divorce. I was going to send him to federal prison for decades. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Henry. My PI found the David Stone address. It's a mail drop in Phoenix. But we found something else. David Stone is listed as the father on a birth certificate in Arizona. Mother, Tiffany Miller. Child, Noah Stone. So Noah wasn't even legally Noah Jenkins. He was part of the lie too. I texted back, I have the insurance letter. He claimed $1.5 million as a business partner. Check your email. I sent the photos. 3 minutes later, Henry replied. Just one word. Bingo. The headlights swept across the living room wall. They were back. I put the phone away and stood up. I went to the sink and started washing a dish that was already clean. Mark walked in, smelling of bourbon and steak. He looked flushed, happy. Still up? He asked, tossing his keys on the counter. Just finishing up, I said. He walked over to me. He stood too close. I could smell the alcohol on his breath. You know, he said, slurring slightly. You're not a bad woman, Sarah. You're just small. You think small. That's why you're still washing dishes in the same house you grew up in. He poked my shoulder. Hard. But don't worry. Uncle Mark is going to set you free. Once we sell, you can go live your small life somewhere else. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had stolen $1.5 million, wasted it, and now wanted to steal my parents' legacy. Thank you, Mark, I said softly. You've really opened my eyes. He laughed, patting my cheek condescendingly. Good. Glad we're on the same page. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, I need you to sign the pre-sale agreement. No more stalling. I won't stall, I promised. I'm ready to end this. He went upstairs, humming to himself. I watched him go. Enjoy your last night of freedom, Mark, I thought. Because tomorrow, the small woman is going to bring down the giant. Sunday morning felt like the eye of a hurricane. The sky was a heavy, bruised purple, threatening more snow. Inside, the tension was so thick you could choke on it. Mark was manic. He was pacing the living room, shouting into his phone at some unfortunate assistant at the developer's office. I said the title is clear. Yes, my wife is on board. She'll sign today. Have the notary ready for tomorrow morning. I want the funds in escrow by Tuesday. He hung up and turned to me. I was sitting on the edge of the sofa, the only piece of furniture left in the living room after the movers had cleared it. Okay, Mark said, rubbing his hands together. Here's the play. My lawyer, Mr. Vance, is coming over at 10 a.m. He's bringing the quitclaim deed and the marital settlement agreement. Sunday? I asked. Lawyers don't usually work on Sundays. Money makes people work whenever you want, Mark sneered. Vance is expensive. Don't waste his time. He sat down next to me, invading my personal space. He dropped his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, the good cop routine. Sarah, look. I know this is hard. I know you're emotional. But read the agreement. I'm being generous. I'm giving you $50,000 from the sale. That's more than you make in a year, $50,000. Out of a $2 million sale. He was offering me 2.5%. Mark, I said, looking at my hands. The house is worth $2 million. His face darkened instantly. The land is worth $2 million. The house is garbage. And who paid the down payment 15 years ago? Me. Who leveraged the connections? Me. Who paid the mortgage for the last 3 years? I asked quietly. That was rent, he exploded, standing up. You were living in my asset. That was rent, Sarah. He took a deep breath, composing himself. Then came the threat. I knew it was coming. Listen, he said, his voice cold. If you don't sign today, things get ugly. I spoke to Dr. Evans. I froze. Dr. Evans was our old family doctor. Why? I told him about your episodes, Mark lied smoothly. How you've been hallucinating since I died. How you talk to walls. How you're hoarding trash. I don't hoard trash. You kept my old shirts for 3 years, Sarah. That's pathology. If we go to court, I will petition for a competency hearing. I will have you declared mentally unfit to manage your affairs. You'll end up in a state facility, and I will get power of attorney over everything anyway. He smiled. Do you want that? Do you want to spend your retirement in a padded room? It was a monstrous lie. No judge would grant that based on hearsay. But he was counting on my fear. He was counting on the small Sarah being terrified of authority. I let my lip tremble. I let a tear slide down my cheek. No, I whispered. Please, Mark. No hospitals. Then sign, he said. Be a good girl. Sign the papers, take the 50 grand, and go start over. I wiped my eye. Okay. I'll sign. Good. He clapped his hands. Vance will be here in an hour. Be ready. I went to the guest room. I closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling a breath I felt I'd been holding for 3 years. I pulled out my burner phone, the one I bought so he couldn't track my calls. I texted Henry. He threatened to commit me. He's pushing for the signature at 10 a.m. Are you ready? Henry's reply came instantly. We are en route. The police are notified. Hold the line, Sarah. I changed my clothes. I took off the baggy sweatpants I had been wearing to look pathetic. I put on my best outfit, a charcoal gray suit I used to wear for hospital board meetings. I put on a little makeup. I brushed my hair back into a tight, severe bun. I looked in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't a victim. She was an executioner. I waited until I heard the doorbell. Sarah! Mark yelled from the living room. Get out here. I walked out. Mr. Vance, a slimy-looking man in a suit that was too shiny, was sitting at the kitchen table. Tiffany was there, too, feeding Noah, looking bored but smug. Mark was standing at the head of the table, a pen in his hand. They all looked up as I entered. Mark frowned at my suit. Why are you dressed like that? He asked. You look like you're going to a funeral. I walked to the table. I didn't sit down. In a way, Mark, I said, my voice steady and strong, echoing off the empty walls. I am. The silence in the kitchen was heavy. Mark stared at me, his brow furrowed. He didn't like the tone of my voice. He didn't like the suit. He sensed a shift in the wind, but his arrogance wouldn't let him believe it was a storm. Sit down, Sarah, Mr. Vance said, tapping a stack of documents. Let's get this over with. I have a tea time at noon. I'm not sitting, I said. Mark rolled his eyes. God, are you going to give a speech? Just sign the damn papers. I invited a guest, I said. Before Mark could ask who, the front door opened. I had unlocked it earlier. Henry Cole walked in. He was using his cane today, tapping it rhythmically on the hardwood floor. Tap. 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 He was wearing his old-fashioned three-piece suit, and he carried a battered leather briefcase that looked like it had survived World War II. Behind him walked a man in a trench coat, the private investigator, and 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies. The air sucked out of the room. Mark dropped the pen. Tiffany stopped feeding the baby. Mr. Vance stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. What is this? Mark demanded, his voice rising an octave. Who are you? Henry Cole, Henry said, his voice gravelly and calm. I represent Mrs. Jenkins. She doesn't need a lawyer, Mark spat. We have an agreement. We have coercion, Henry corrected. We have threats of involuntary commitment. And we have fraud. Mr. Vance stepped forward, trying to puff out his chest. Now wait a minute. You can't just barge in here with police. This is a civil matter. It was a civil matter, Henry said. He reached the table and placed his briefcase down. He opened it slowly, deliberately. Until your client made it a criminal one. Mark laughed. It was a nervous, high-pitched sound. Criminal? Are you crazy? I'm reclaiming my own house. That's not a crime. No, I said. I stepped forward, taking my place beside Henry. But faking your death is. Insurance fraud is. Identity theft is. Mark's face went white. Not pale. White. Like a sheet of paper. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered. I didn't fake my death. I had amnesia. I was lost. Amnesia, I repeated. That's funny. Because David Stone seemed to have a very good memory. I saw the name hit him like a physical blow. He flinched. His eyes darted to the briefcase, then to the door, then to Tiffany. Tiffany looked up, confused. Who is David Stone? Ask him, I said, pointing at Mark. Ask him who paid for your furs in Cabo. Ask him whose name is on the bank account in the Caymans. Sarah, stop, Mark hissed. You're delusional. You're making things up. Am I? Henry pulled the stack of photos from his briefcase. He fanned them out on the kitchen table, covering the eviction notice and the settlement agreement. The passport photo. The insurance letter claiming $1.5 million. The photo of Mark and Tiffany on the boat in Cabo, dated 1 month after his death. The birth certificate of Noah Stone. Mark stared at the table. He looked like a man watching his own execution. This? Vance picked up the insurance letter. His hands started to shake. He looked at Mark. Mark, what is this? You told me the insurance lapsed. You told me there was no payout. It's a forgery. Mark screamed. She forged it. She's trying to frame me. We verified it with Apex Insurance this morning, Henry said calmly. Their fraud department was very interested. They've already issued a warrant. That's why the deputies are here. One of the deputies stepped forward. Mark Jenkins? Or should I say, David Stone? Mark backed away, bumping into the counter. No. No, this is a mistake. I can explain. It was a business strategy. A holding company. It was theft, I said. You stole $1.5 million. You let me starve, Mark. You let me work 3 jobs to pay off your gambling debts while you were drinking champagne on a yacht. I walked closer to him. I wanted him to see my eyes. I wanted him to see the weak Sarah. You called me small, I said. You said I couldn't handle the real world. But Mark? I lived in the real world for 3 years. You? You lived in a fantasy. And the fantasy is over. Mark looked at Tiffany. Baby, tell them. Tell them I was sick. Tell them I didn't know who I was. Tiffany stood up. She looked at the photos. She looked at the police. She looked at Mark, sweating and trembling. And then, she did exactly what I expected a parasite to do when the host begins to die. She detached. I didn't know, Tiffany said, her voice trembling with fake tears. She looked at the police officer. Officer, I didn't know. He told me he was a widower. He told me his wife died in a car crash. He kidnapped me emotionally. Tiffany. Mark gasped. What are you doing? He's a liar. Tiffany screamed, pointing a manicured finger at him. He dragged me into this. I thought he was David Stone. I didn't know he was a criminal. It was a lie, of course. She knew. The texts proved she knew. But in that moment, watching Mark's face crumble as his trophy wife threw him to the wolves, it was sweeter than any wine. The deputy pulled out his handcuffs. The sound of the ratchet clicking, click, 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 was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. Mark Jenkins, the deputy said. You are under arrest for insurance fraud, identity theft, and forgery. You have the right to remain silent. Mark lunged. He didn't lunge at the police. He lunged at me. You bitch, he screamed, his face contorted into a mask of pure hate. You ruined everything. You useless, barren bitch. He got one hand on my throat before the deputies tackled him. We crashed into the table. The papers flew everywhere. The eviction notice. The photos. The lies. All scattered on the floor. I stumbled back, gasping. Henry caught my arm to steady me. Mark was on the floor, pinned by 2 large men. His face was pressed against the linoleum, the same floor I had scrubbed on my hands and knees. Get him out of here, the deputy grunted. They hauled him up. He was handcuffed behind his back. His expensive suit was crumpled. His hair was messy. He looked pathetic. As they dragged him out the door, he looked back at me. There was no arrogance left. Only fear. "Sarah," he pleaded. "Sarah, please. The house. The bond. I can't go to jail. Sarah." I looked at him. I straightened my jacket. "This is my house, Mark," I said coldly. "And you're trespassing." They dragged him out into the snow. The house fell silent again, but this time, it wasn't heavy. It was the silence of a battlefield after the cannon stopped firing. Tiffany was still in the kitchen, clutching Noah. She looked at me, her eyes wide with fear. She expected me to scream at her. To throw her out. She started. "I can pack. I can leave." I looked at the baby. He was innocent in this. "You have an hour," I said. "Pack your things. Leave everything that Mark bought with the stolen money, the jewelry, the furs. Those are evidence now. Take only what is yours and the baby's." "Where will I go?" she whimpered. "I don't know," I said. "And frankly, Tiffany, I don't care. Maybe try working for a living. It builds character." She scrambled to the guest room. Henry and the PI stayed while the police took statements. Mr. Vance, Mark's lawyer, had slunk away the moment the handcuffs came out, muttering about conflict of interest. "You did good, Sarah," Henry said, packing up his briefcase. This was legendary. "Is the house safe?" I asked. "The house is evidence," Henry said. "But since you are the victim and the rightful owner, and since Mark's claim to it was based on fraud, yes. We'll file for an emergency divorce and asset forfeiture. The judge will strip him of everything to pay back the insurance company." "But the house?" "The house predates the fraud. It's yours." "And his debts?" I asked. "The gambling?" "Those belong to him," Henry smiled. "And since he's going to federal prison, the creditors will have to get in line behind the U.S. government." "You are clear." I sat down at the table, surrounded by the scattered papers. I put my head in my hands and, for the first time in 3 years, I cried. Not tears of grief. Tears of release. The dam had finally broken. The legal process was surprisingly fast. The mountain of evidence I had provided was insurmountable. Mark pled guilty to avoid a 30-year sentence. He took a plea deal, 15 years in federal prison, restitution of all stolen funds, and forfeiture of all assets. The divorce hearing was a formality. I stood before Judge Coleman, a stern woman with glasses on a chain. Mark wasn't there, he was attending via video link from the county jail, wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed horribly with his complexion. He looked aged, deflated. "Mrs. Jenkins," the judge said. "I have reviewed the case file. The conduct of the defendant is, reprehensible is too light a word." She looked at the screen. "Mr. Jenkins, you abandoned your wife, faked your death, stole millions, and then returned to try and render her homeless. In my 20 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such malice." Mark said nothing. He just stared at the floor. "I am granting the divorce on grounds of extreme cruelty and fraud," the judge ruled. "I am awarding 100% of the marital home to Mrs. Jenkins. I am also awarding Mrs. Jenkins full rights to any remaining legitimate assets as restitution for the debts she paid on your behalf." She banged the gavel. Bang. It was over. As I walked out of the courthouse, the winter sun was shining. It was cold, but it felt clean. I walked to my car. I saw Tiffany in the parking lot. She was arguing with a man in a beat-up sedan, her father, maybe? She looked tired. Her designer clothes looked out of place. She saw me and looked away, ashamed. I didn't feel triumph over her. I felt nothing. She was just a footnote in my story. Returning to the house that afternoon, I knew I had work to do. I walked into the master bedroom. It still smelled of them. Tiffany's perfume. Mark's cologne. I opened the windows, letting the freezing Michigan air blast through the room. I wanted the cold. I wanted it to scour the room clean. I stripped the bed. The sheets, the duvet, the pillows, everything they had touched went into heavy-duty trash bags. I went to the closet. Mark's clothes, the ones he hadn't taken to jail, were still there. The cashmere coats. The silk shirts. I didn't donate them. I dragged the bags out to the fire pit in the backyard. I piled the wood high. I doused it in lighter fluid. And I threw Mark's luxury life onto the pyre. I lit the match. The fire roared to life, hungry and bright. I watched the cashmere curl and blacken. I watched the silk melt. The smoke rose into the twilight sky, carrying away the last vestiges of Mark Jenkins. I stood there in the snow, watching it burn, warming my hands on the destruction of my past. "Goodbye, Mark," I whispered. I went back inside. I walked through every room. I touched the walls. "You're safe now," I told the house. "We're both safe." I went to the kitchen and picked up my blue ceramic mug, the one Tiffany had mocked. It was chipped, yes. But it was sturdy. It held heat. It had survived. Just like me. It has been 1 year since that day. The developers built their highway, but the route changed slightly. My house wasn't torn down, but the property value did skyrocket. I sold it 6 months ago. I sold it for $2.4 million. It was hard to say goodbye to my parents' home. But I realized that the house had become a tomb. It held too many ghosts. I needed fresh air. I used the money to buy a smaller, beautiful cottage on the other side of the lake, far away from the memories. It has a sunroom where I grow orchids. It has a guest room that is actually for guests. I didn't retire. I realized I loved nursing too much to quit. But I cut back my hours. I work 3 days a week now, and I specialize in patient advocacy. I help women, widows, mostly, navigate the confusing world of medical bills and insurance. I make sure no one takes advantage of them. Mark is currently serving year 1 of his 15-year sentence at a medium security facility in Ohio. I heard from Henry that he's working in the prison laundry. It seems fitting. He's finally learning how to clean up his own mess. Tiffany moved back to Arizona with Noah. I hope, for the boy's sake, she grows up. But that's not my burden to carry. I am sitting on my new porch as I tell you this, watching the sunset over the water. My tea is hot. My bank account is full. My conscience is clear. People ask me if I'm lonely. I tell them, I was lonely when I was married to a liar. I was lonely when I was grieving a ghost. Now? Now I am alone, but I am not lonely. I am full. I found out I am stronger than I ever imagined. I found out that you can walk through fire and come out not as ash, but as steel. So, to anyone listening to this who feels trapped, to anyone who is being told they are small, or weak, or that they should just sign the papers and give up, don't. They want you to be quiet because your voice is dangerous. They want you to be weak because your strength terrifies them. Mark Jenkins thought he could erase me. He thought I was just a supporting character in the movie of his life. He forgot that even the quietest character can flip the script if you push them too far. If you are going through hell, keep walking. Document everything. Save the receipts. Take the photos. And never, ever let anyone tell you that you don't matter. My name is Sarah Jenkins. I am 53 years old. I am a nurse. I am a survivor. And I am finally, truly, free. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had to fight for what was yours against someone you once trusted, tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And remember, the truth doesn't just set you free. Sometimes, it pays you back with interest.